November of this year will mark the 10-year anniversary of the 2015 Commander decks. With that is when we were given the Commander Meren of Clan Nel Toth. I had a Meren deck for nearly a decade. I got it when it first came out. It was my first attempt at playing Golgari. I built Meren specifically because I didn't have a Golgari deck at that point. I didn't really dabble with black or green too much in Commander or Magic in general. And so Meren was definitely going out of my comfort zone to sort of build that and just embrace a lot of the tropes of green and black in Magic. And it's gone on to be a wildly popular commander. Even now, 10 years later, Meren is still number 34 of the top commanders of all time. It's the highest Golgari commander that is not based on a specific tribe like elves or squirrels. So Meren still holds that distinction a decade later, which, given the power creep that we've seen in Magic in recent years, really speaks volumes to her staying power. But I came here to bury Meren, not to praise her, as I am swapped her out for a new commander, which I've actually found to be quite enjoyable, the Gitrog Ravenous Ride. Now, I should preface this by saying that I really still do appreciate what Meren is trying to do, and it is just a very great commander for people. I mean, there's a reason why it's so popular. You get to just play and just recur creatures over and over and over. There's a lot of fun there. It feels like you are impervious to, removal. Unless it's graveyard removal, then you're in trouble. But what prompted me to make the change from Meren to this? Well, it was a slow process to get from where I started to the Gitrog Ravenous Ride. With Meren, it started just sort of leaning more into a landfall theme and playing more landfall effects in Meren. And then when the Gitrog Ravenous Ride was released, I added that to the deck and found that I enjoyed playing the Gitrog Ravenous Ride. I thought maybe I should just make him the commander. And so what I've been doing for the past little while is slowly taking out things that made it a Meren deck, your Spore Frog and things like that, and then put things in it to make it more unique to a deck helmed by Gitrog Ravenous Ride. But with that being said, when I went on to EDA Trek and other sites that just list a whole bunch of commander decks, I really was not impressed with what I saw. Like, everybody who's making a Gitrog Ravenous Ride deck, or at least most of the people I've seen, are putting in a lot of what I consider, frankly, suboptimal creatures. Now, they're creatures with a high power at a low mana value, but a lot of them have drawbacks, and I don't think you need to do that, especially in this day and age. There's so many other alternatives that I think are better. Just an example of some of the most highly played cards, you have like the Demagoth Titan from Strixhaven, which is like an 11/10, but whenever he attacks or blocks, you sacrifice a creature. So, okay, you play him on turn 4, you're probably not going to attack or block with him until you can play a commander. But hey, then you get an 11, you get 11 power off of your saddled sacrifice. But I don't like that. It's 4 mana. Yes, it is 11 power, but I don't think it's worth it when you have a creature that, can't attack, can't block, doesn't have trample or any kind of evasion. If your commander's not out, if you don't have that as part of the immediate game plan, I don't care for that. Even ones that are pretty decent, like Shakedown Heavy, that's one from Streets of New Capenna. It's a 6/4 for 3 and has Menace, so it's got some form of evasion on there. And you're probably not going to attack with him because you give your opponents a chance to untap him and not take any damage. But again, I don't like cards where you're giving your opponent a choice either, because they're always going to choose what's best for them and never what's best for you. Rotting Registrar gets closer. It's a 7/6 for 3, but even still, I don't play that in my deck because you just make yourself discard a card. I mean, you've got lots of recursion in this deck. You've got ways to make up the card disadvantage. If there was one that I was going to put on the list, that one would probably become close. It's just not there for me, though. And then you get down to other ones like the Lupine Prototype. It can't attack or block, and it's a 5/5 for 2. And it's like, well, would you play a 5/5 for 2? Or the Phyrexian Soul Gorger, that's an 8/8 for 3. And would you play that? Sure, it's got the cumulative upkeep. You're probably not going to want to play him before you play your commander. And it's like, well, if we're not playing him before we play our commander, then you may as well cut the Phyrexian Soul Gorger altogether, because you could play the new card from Edge of Eternities, the Bygone Colossus. That's a 9/9 for 9, but you can warp it in for 3. So if you're going to play a Phyrexian Soul Gorger the turn after you drop your commander, or the turn you drop your commander, so you can immediately saddle it for 8/8 and you don't have to worry about the drawback, well, then you can just warp in a Bygone Colossus and then you got 1 more power. Now, with that even said, I'm not even running Bygone Colossus in my deck, but I would run that over most of the cards that are in the Gitrog Ravenous Ride deck, just because it doesn't really have any drawbacks. I mean, it's a 9/9 for 9, but if you're just playing it to warp it in and then immediately sacrifice it, then that doesn't matter. Edge of Eternity is just a boon for the whole Gitrog Ravenous Ride, because all those warp creatures just do wonders for it. And I think that warping them in, like warping in a 5/5 for 2, is a lot better than just casting a 5/5 for 2 that can't attack or block. Because, maybe you'll play them, maybe you'll play the cards later, if you do just warp it in for a turn and then you can cast it later. For me, I'll show you what I've got. Like, I wasn't including any of just the strictly high power creatures in the deck, but I did break down for the Calaxion Hunger Tyrant, which is the 7/2 vanilla. And this is one where it's 3 mana, it's a 7/2, but it has no downside. You don't have to discard a card, you don't have to sacrifice a creature. It's just, I just put down 3 mana, and then if I get my commander out later, fine, I'll sacrifice it, 7 power. And I can do that. But this is pretty much what I consider like the low end on the totem pole. I think everything else that I'm playing for targets for the Gitrog Ravenous Ride has more purpose. And I guess I should probably explain, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the card, what the Gitrog Ravenous Ride does. It has Trample and Haste. That's a 6/5 for 5 mana. And whenever the Gitrog Ravenous Ride deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice a creature that's saddled it this turn. And so a saddle is just like crewing a vehicle, basically, is that you can tap a creature to saddle it, and this guy is saddle 1, so you can tap any creature with power 1 or greater to saddle it. But then when he deals combat damage to play, you may sacrifice a creature that's saddled it this turn. If you do, you draw X cards and put up to X land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, where X is a sacrifice creature's power. And so you can see why people are stuffing their deck with as many bad creatures with high power. It doesn't matter what the drawbacks are, just it's got high power, so I can just drop all those down, and then I just need to play my commander, swing, and go to town. But I just don't like that. I don't like that you have all these suboptimal cards that are their only use, their only benefit is being eaten by your commander. And maybe my version's going to be inferior compared to what other people are doing, but I think there's a better way to go about it. You can play decent, good creatures in your deck and still have it function, even if they're not as efficient in terms of raw power to mana value ratio. But so Calaxion Hunger Tyrant is the bottom of the barrel here. And the next one I have is, again, speaking of warp, Anti-Causal Vestige. So that's an Eldrazi for 6, and it's a 7/5, but you can warp it in for 4. So if you play your commander, and presumably like you sack this guy, you play this guy on turn 3, you play commander on turn 5, sack him, and the next turn you can just play this for 4, and then tap it for 7, and then immediately sack it. But it has, when this creature leaves the battlefield, you draw a card, and then you can put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So this is reading like it was pretty much made to go in a Gitrog Ravenous Ride deck, because you are playing the card, sacrificing it. When it leaves, you're immediately replacing it with something else, and assuming you're sacrificing, you're just drawn a bunch of cards, played out a bunch of lands, and then you'll be able to drop the biggest thing in your hand onto the battlefield. And then, let's say you don't sacrifice them. Let's say you sacrifice something else, something bigger, but you just play this for 4 to warp it. You can do that. It gets exiled. You put something huge down, and then next turn you can just cast him, sack him, and do it again. But this is really what I'm getting to. Is there are creatures out there that are really strong on their own, and they don't have huge drawbacks, and they cost maybe 1 more mana than the Daemogoth Titans, like Obnixilis, the Fallen. Like, this is a great one. For 1 more mana than the Daemogoth Titans, he's a 3/3 for 5, but he has Landfall. Whenever land you control enters, you may have target player lose 3 life. If you do, put 3+1/+1 counters on Obnixilis. So if you're having, 3, 4, 5, 6 or more land drops entering the battlefield, you can quickly take people out of the game and turn Obnixilis into a huge creature that can be then sacrificed to the Gitrog, Ravenous Ride, and just continue to get more and more lands out and draw more cards. But so that's where the deck was really leaning, is looking for creatures that get better as you are playing more lands. So like Ashaya, Soul of the Wild, is a 5 mana, and its power and toughness are each equals the number of lands you control. So again, I'm running a lot of these type of effects, because the Gitrog, you're just going to get bigger and bigger, and the later on you play them, it's like with the Divogoth Titans and a lot of those other ones, the Shakedown Heavies, yes, they only cost 3 or 4 mana, and they give you, 6 to 10, 11 power maybe. So they've got a high floor, but a low ceiling. Whereas these, the floor is a little lower, but it can get much higher, to where you could be sacrificing this, and it's going to be for a lot more than 10 or 11. It could be 13, 15, sky's the limit. And Ashai also has the benefit of turning all of your non-token creatures, or having them count as forest lands in addition to their other types. So this one's really fun. It has a lot of great applications. One of my favorite is one of the best counters to Cyclonic Rift. People never see it coming. You'll play Cyclonic Rift, and I'll just keep all my cards there. It's like, hey, you gotta return them to your hand. It's like, no, it says non-land permanent. All my creatures are lands. Sorry. And that even ties into a couple other cards I have in the deck, like Blast Zone. It says, sacrifice Blast Zone, destroy each non-land permanent with convert mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Blast Zone. So you can spare all of your creatures from the Blast Zone when Ashai is out. But that's another card that's perfectly fine to sacrifice. If it's equal to the number of lands you control, you'll just get a ton more lands into play. And speaking of other huge creatures that I would run, for 6 mana, you can have Bane of Progress. And so then you play him. He gets huge because everybody's sacrificing all their artifacts and enchantments, and you're left with a huge creature on the board, which you can then sacrifice to Gitrog. Now, there was one I did make a concession for, Yargle and Multani. Now, that is one that is kind of, it doesn't have a drawback, but it is still just a big vanilla 6 mana, but it's 18 power. It's so above the curve of what you expect to see for 6 mana that I was like, yeah, if I'm gonna run one, it's sort of like the bookend for the Hunger Tyrant. That's my 3 mana 7 power, and this is my 6 mana 18 power. But those are really the only two that where my sacrifice fodder kind of overlaps with most mainstream Gitrog Ravenous Ride decks. A lot of my others, though, are still leaning into, they care about lands and get bigger as the lands get bigger. So you got like Lumra, Bellow of the Woods, who can get back a lot of your lands from the graveyard, and has Vigilance, Reach, no Trample, but the Vigilance helps, and not that you'll really be attacking with it much anyways. You'll usually just play him, get some more lands back from your graveyard, and then sacrifice him to get more lands out of your deck into play. Multani is great, Multani Yavamaya's avatar, because you can sacrifice it, and then its ability gives you the opportunity to return it from your graveyard to your hand. And all you have to do is return 2 lands you control to your owner's hand, which is fine, because if you're sacrificing them to the Ravenous Ride again, then you're just going to get those lands back into play. So this is probably one of the best ones that you can sacrifice to Gitrog, and it gets +1/+1 for each land you control and each land in your graveyard, so it gets even bigger than the lands you have in play. It has Reach, Trample, so it could end the game on its own as well. If you get tired of sacrificing it to put lands into play, you could just leave it out and have it swing in for a ridiculous amount. Cultivator Colossus is another one that I have in here. I just sort of like the press your luck aspect of it. Now, I'm not playing Abundance or any tricks to make you get every land from your deck onto the battlefield. I could, but I just like the whole fact that you can just play them and just see how long your luck holds out, and we keep drawing lands and have enough lands to play. And honestly, if I were to tweak the deck a little bit, it could make him more impactful, but as of right now, he's just mainly in there just to be another big trampler that I can sacrifice to Gitrog. And one of the newest ones from Edge of Eternities I added is the Famished World Sire. And when I read the card, Devour Land 3, it's like when this creature enters, with the top X card to your library, X is the creature's power. And when he enters, you can devour any number of lands, and for each land devoured, you get to put 3 counters on him. But then you can put any number of land cards from among them on the battlefield, tap, and shuffle when he enters. So he enters, you eat all your lands, and then you reveal, equal to his power, which is going to be 3 times the amount of lands you sacrificed. So, say you sacrifice, 10 lands, and then you're going to look at the top 30 cards of your deck, and I remember thinking, wow, you're like doubling or tripling the lands you get, but that's not really how it works, because with the mana base you have, it's more like Scape Shift is what it turns out to be, because I found that whenever I eat all the lands, I will get back pretty much whatever I put into it is what I will get out of it. I'll maybe be up on lands by like 1 or 2, maybe. But I found that I'm just basically trading 10 lands for 10 or 11, 12 new lands. So it's not as ridiculous as it may seem. You're not really ramping so much, but it does give you a lot of landfall triggers really quickly. So that works and has a lot of synergies with the different landfall effects in this deck. And then, of course, the old standby, Ghalta, Primal Hunger. I mean, he's just 2 mana for a 12 trample is really nice, especially with all the other big, beefy creatures in the deck. And now, with a lot of these other creatures as a way to close out the game, Jared Golgari Lichlord is another one. He can also be sacrificed himself to Gitrog because he gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. So if you keep sacrificing all these creatures, you can play him. He's huge. Sacrifice him. But then you can also sack a swamp and a forest, which you'll have more lands than you know what to do with at that point anyway. So you can always get him back from your graveyard to your hand to replay him. But he can also be an alternate win condition because if you do have a huge creature, you can just use his ability to pay 3, sacrifice another creature, and then each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. And so if you're sacrificing, like a Cultivated Colossus or Multani or Yargul Multani, then your opponents are going to run out of life really quickly. But what has me baffled about all of the big creatures with drawbacks is there's other things that you could do. I would rather run small utility creatures that maybe aren't going to draw you a ton of cards, but they're at least more useful on their own. They have more of a purpose in there other than to just be sacrificed because they can't attack or block effectively. I would rather run pump spells. And so in the case of, I've got Berserk in here. That's 1 for 1 mana. You can double a creature's power. I mean, most people would want to do that to double the power of your attacking creature, but in the case of your commander, you don't want to sacrifice him at the end of combat. And so you can just pump up a huge creature that's saddling him to draw double the cards and play double the lands. Have a couple of equipment in here. Blackblade Reforged and Staff of Titania. And the deck is more heavily green than black. Otherwise, I would have run Lash Writhe as well. But Lash Writhe is much too dependent on me finding Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth in order to make it effective. I might try running it in there later, but I'm fine with just these 2 for now. But these ones, you can just put those on your cheap creatures. Now, granted, it's a little hard to equip Blackblade Reforged onto a non-legendary creature. It costs 7 mana to do that. But Staff of Titania can go on for just 3 mana, and then you can immediately start pumping out more Forest Dryad creatures. But I like these that they can just be used to just buff up, the smallest 1/1 insect token can suddenly be a viable threat that can be sacrificed or even just go in to attack. But again, when I look at people playing a lot of the cards they do in Gitrog, I'm like, where is Invigorate? This is insane. There's 4 Explorers in 1, but it's free. It's 4 free Explorers. Because you saddle a creature, and then before combat damage happens, you have somebody gain 4 life, so you can cast this for free. And then target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Suddenly, that creature that was drawing you 7 cards is drawing you 11 cards, and letting you play up to 11 land. Or even if it's a small creature. If you have Bloodghast, that's 2 power, but then Invigorate is going to make it 6 power. So then you suddenly go from drawing 2 cards, playing 2 lands, to 6 cards and 6 lands, potentially. So I don't know why this isn't run in every single Gitrog deck, because it just... Pump effects in general just make Gitrog and all your other creatures so much better. I'd rather run a Giant Growth over a Demagoth Titan, because I would rather turn, 2 cards into a lot of card advantage as opposed to 1 suboptimal card. Because you're making your card advantage back. I found myself that every time I'm sacrificing a huge creature, I'm having to discard down to hand size in a turn because you can't keep everything you want. So who cares if you're using 2 cards or 3 cards to pump up a creature, buff it up in order to draw a lot of cards off of it. And then the Skullspore Nexus, I think everyone's pretty much is running this in Gitrog. It's just awesome. You double a creature's power, but whenever 1 or more non-token creatures die, you can create a green fungus dinosaur, so you're pretty much doubling up the effects of whatever your huge creature was, just get another one on top of it. So Skullspore Nexus is awesome. But it really showed me playing this deck just to see how imperative it is to connect the first time with the Gitrog. And so I think you really want to invest a decent amount of slots in just protecting him, so you can just make that initial hit, because once you hit at least once and are able to get a couple extra lands into play, then you're already have the commander tax paid for your next turn. And I think that's how you need to look at it, is this land is equal to how many commander taxes. It can get to a point to where you'll be able to recast your commander more than your opponents will have removal to deal with it. And so I'm running things like Sylvan Safekeeper. Like, he's one of my favorite things to drop early, because then I just know it's like, oh, I can put out my commander and I'm going to be safe, because I can sacrifice all the lands if I need to keep him protected, because I'm just going to get all those lands back and more once he's able to connect. Blossoming Defense, this does a little bit of both. You can use this to protect your commander, or if you don't need to and you just want to draw a couple extra cards, you can buff the creature that has been saddled, and then just use that to just get a couple extra cards, a couple extra lands off it, all for 1 mana. Tyvar's Stand, this one can potentially end the game if you have a ton of lands out and you just pump X to make your commander lethal for commander damage. But it also offers hexproof and indestructible as well. So if they're trying to remove him, you can make it so it can't be a target. Overprotect, another similar to the Blossoming Defense. You can give +2/+3, trample, hexproof, and indestructible. And again, that can translate into another 3 cards if you wanted to. And Heroic Intervention, of course, classic, that just does it for all of your permanents, hexproof and indestructible. Guardian Augmenter. Now this one's nice because it's being used with a command you actually want to attack with, so the +2 matters often. But I love this. You can do it in response to removal, which is fine. But I like flashing it in the turn before I plan to play my commander, because, like, let's say I've got, a creature out that I want to sacrifice, and then the turn before I play my commander, just flash this in and say, hey, guess what? My commander is going to have hexproof on my turn. And so the next turn you can just drop the Gitrog down. He's got haste and hexproof because of the Augmenter, and so then you can just go through and sacrifice, and then they have to deal with the Augmenter first before they can get your commander. Sereth, the Viper's Fang, this is another one I'm surprised I don't see as like a most played card in the Gitrog Ravenous Ride decks, because the Gitrog has haste and trample, but he doesn't have Death Touch. This can give him Death Touch. Other tapped creatures you control have Death Touch. And so when your commander's attacking, if he's got Trample and Death Touch, then all of a sudden your opponents have to commit 6 creatures to blocking him in order to prevent him getting through with damage, because the way the rules work with Death Touch and Trample is you just have to assign 1 point of damage to each blocker, and the rest can spill over and get through. But let's say your opponent wants to kill your commander. Well, other untapped creatures you control have hexproof, and you can pay 1 and tap her to untap another creature or land. So if they're targeting my commander, I can pay 1 tap to untap him after he's attacking. He doesn't remove him from combat, but now he has hexproof, and so it can also help dodge removal that way. And there's so many cards in here that are huge and have trample, but get even more deadly when she's giving them all Death Touch. So yeah, Sereth, I think, is just a valuable addition to the deck. And then a couple of MDFC lands, Revitalizing Repast and Malakir Rebirth, both can save creatures in their own way. The Repast can make it indestructible. And the Malakir Rebirth, you can have, when this creature dies, return the battlefield tapped under zone's control. So if they do kill it, you can at least get it back. Or you can get back the creature you saddled, even. But yeah, so those are a lot of what I have to keep my commander protected. I do have, and these cards are some of the last holdovers from my old Meren deck. And so maybe they won't stick around in the long term, we'll see, but I really do like them. I have these cards, which are land tutors that I run. Elvish Reclaimer and this guy from Modern Horizons 3. And these two can both sacrifice things to search for lands. And so typically I'll try to grab Yavimaya or Urborg or Cabal Coffers or Thespian Stage or Vesuva to just make more copies of the coffers. That's what these are mainly here for. And sacrificing lands is no big deal because there's a lot of ways to get lands back into play. This is a bit more of an ask because it is wanting to compete for sacrifice effects with the commander, and I'm purposefully trying to keep those pretty limited because I want pretty much everything that's going to be sacrificed to the commander. But there are still cards that produce tokens, and so this has its place in sacrificing tokens or sacrificing this next one, Bloodghast. It can just be a nice little engine going. You just sacrifice a Bloodghast to get a land. When the land enters, Bloodghast comes back, and you just do that every turn. But I do have quite a few landfall effects here, in addition to the blood gas, which can be sacrificed over and over. And it can wear equipment. It can get pretty big by itself, and so you can use it as repeatable sack fodder with your commander if you get that up and going. But then also Skewed Swarm, token producer for the Reliquary. Floral Evoker. So this one's interesting. It's landfall. Whenever land you control enters, you put a +1 counter on this creature. And you can pay green, discard a creature card to return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So this can be a nice instant surprise landfall trigger. I mean, it's telegraphed, it's on the board, but you can be discarding cards from your hand to get lands back. Mossborn Hydra. See, this is another example. I'd rather play a Mossborn Hydra on turn 3 than to play, Rotting Regisaur or something. Because this one's going to start out as a 1/1, but every land you play is going to double its power. It's going to be a 1/1. But then on, next turn, then it's going to be a 2/2, and a 4/4, and an 8/8. And pretty soon, it's going to just get out of control. And if this isn't the first one you sacrifice, if you sacrifice something else, and this is in play when you get all the lands off of it, then it's going to be over before it begins, pretty much. But this is another example, like the Mightform Harmonizer. People are playing, creatures that are 4 mana for like a 10/10 or an 11/10 or something. But this one, you can drop it turn 4, and then the next time when you play your commander, you put down another land. Then suddenly this isn't 4 power, this is 8 power, and you could just sack the 8 power to your commander off the saddle effect. But it also has warp. So if you're going to be sacrificing it anyways and play it, and you just want to play it the same turn, you can save yourself 1 mana by just paying it for 3 instead of 4, then playing the land double its power, and then sack it to your commander. And this one, I'm glad I got this before the price spiked. Tiller Engine. This one's awesome. Whenever land you control enters the battlefield tapped, you can choose one. You can untap that land, or tap target non-land permanent an opponent controls. So this is another example of the Floral Invoker. You can have a surprise tap-down effect by getting a tapped land into play and then using the Tiller Engine to tap down a potential blocker. Or you can even do it to tap down an attacker. I think, don't undervalue, instant speed ways to get lands into play, especially when you've got a Tiller Engine or any sort of landfall effect, because it can really throw people off of their game. I also do have a little suite of a reanimation package here, starting with Reanimate, of course. But also Exploration Broodship. Now, I've talked about this one before. I think it's really undervalued at $3, and I have it in here, not so much for the extra land plays, because we're going to get plenty of that, but for the final move of, during a turn, you can cast a permanent from your graveyard by sacrificing a land in addition to paying its other costs. So that just is insane to me. It really reminds me of 6, which is another card I recommended on this channel, and has since doubled in price, if not more. And that, because it has such a unique effect. It's as long as your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace. So this one, instead of sacrificing a land, you can just discard a land from your hand to play the cards. Now, I should note that this one is not limited to once a turn. So if you have a bunch of lands in your hand, a bunch of things in your yard you want to play, you can just discard all the land cards to play all those things back. But those are both great ways to get cards back that have been sacrificed by the Gitrog Ravenous Ride. Nissa of Shattered Bows. I know Planeswalkers are pretty hard to pull off in commander decks, but I think she works because her landfall ability puts counters on her. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, put a loyalty counter on Nissa of Shattered Bows. And then you can untap a creature and have it become a 3/3 elemental, which you can sacrifice in a pinch if you just want to do that with your commander. But the real key here is -5 of putting a creature card with mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield from your hand or graveyard with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So you can get things out of your hand, that's worth noting, but more often than not, you'll be getting back the things you've already sacrificed out of your yard, and they'll come back with 2 counters on them. And if they're big enough, you can just keep sacrificing, getting a thing back every turn with Nissa. So she sort of becomes, she's basically Meren of Clan Nel Toth in this deck. Which, Meren was a card I had in here for a while, but I think I finally eventually ended up cutting her. She could probably come back, I'm sure, at some point. She's still really good. But I just have her out for right now. But Nissa does a pretty good imitation, especially when you're playing as many lands, because you can use her minus ability every turn. And then you got Eternal Witness and Skullwinder, just a couple of cards to get things back out of the yard. And, people, kind of, turn their head sideways at Skullwinder. It's really? Skullwinder? That gives people an advantage? And yeah, that typically goes against what I want to do, but it can be a very nice political card, especially if you're giving somebody, hey, take this out, use it on this other guy. Now, the thing is about Gitrog Ravenous Ride is sometimes you're public enemy number 1, so how often you'll get a chance to actually use Skullwinder and have it matter is up for debate. But I like having it in here for now, at least. But then World Shaper, we've talked about all these different ways to sacrifice lands or discard lands. World Shaper helps you get them all into play. When he dies, and again, you can sacrifice him to your commander, you get all the lands from your graveyard back into play. I see a lot of people like running Splendid Reclamation just to get all the lands back, but I don't know, it's a sorcery, and I'm just like, I'd rather have it stapled onto a creature when possible, and World Shaper, I think, does a better job. And then Agadeem's Awakening is a modal double face card. But with this one, you can just take all of your mana to get back all the creatures you've been sacrificing back into play. So that one just kind of speaks for itself. But every deck, now we're so getting into the meat and potatoes here. We got ramp and card draw and removal, things every deck needs. And so we've got the usual suspects. We've got Soul Ring. We got some lands. I was dabbling with having some 1-mana elves, and I probably could go back to that. But since I had so many landfall effects and landfall synergies, it felt better to just run with Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 visits. And I could maybe play more. Some people are running like a lot more ramp. They want to just be able to get their commander out as quickly as possible. And I don't know. I'm not quite there yet. Maybe I'll eventually trend that way. But I kind of just like playing, maybe a little faster, but not going, nuts. It can just be, play a few things. And when shields are down, when we're ready to play commander, then we'll drop it and, go off. But things like Lotus Cobra, Tireless Provisioner, things that just turn all of the tapped lands you're playing off of your commander, getting extra resources from them, either extra mana or treasure tokens. Of course, it's worth noting that the Lotus Cobra, the lands you're getting off of the Gitrog Ravenous Ride, is going to disappear as steps and phases in. So it's not going to be super useful during the Massive Flood unless you've got activated abilities or instant speed things you can use to capitalize on that mana. But also have a couple of other creatures to help ramp. Gwyna, Eyes of Gaia. You can add 2 mana, any combination of colors, to cast creature spells or activate creature abilities. But when you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, you can put a +1/+1 counter on Gwyna, Eyes of Gaia, and untap it. So you can find yourself tapping to cast multiple creatures in a turn with her. And then Selvala, Heart of the Wild, because of course, when you've got an 18 power creature, you can just generate absurd amounts of mana in addition to all the lands you're putting into play. And I'm not running as many card draw effects in this deck as I typically would, as many card effects as I had when it was the Meren deck. Just because Gitrog draws so many cards, and you find yourself going down to 7 cards so frequently that it didn't feel necessary to have a bunch of draw effects. You've got Spinner of Souls, which I've talked about previously on this channel. I have this one in here just because you can, when you lose a creature, you can replace it with another creature. And so you're constantly finding fuel for the frog. And speaking of frog, we have the original Gitrog monster in here as well. There's not a ton of land sacrifice synergies in this deck. There's a few things that can sacrifice, like the Sylvan Safekeeper can sacrifice lands. And even then, things like the Famished World Sire, you sacrifice all the lands at once. And so with the Gitrog, you're only drawing 1 card off of that, because it doesn't matter how many lands are sacrificed. It could be 1, it could be 10. You're still only drawing 1 card when it's happening all at once. Now, the Sylvan Safekeeper, you can sacrifice 1 land at a time, drawing a card, drawing a card, drawing a card. But I have him in here mainly just for themes, and because I think the art looks cool. This is another one I could see cutting from the deck, just because it doesn't have a ton of synergies with what the deck's trying to do. But I have him in there for now, and then have a Greater Good as well as another way to sacrifice and draw a ton of cards, sort of acts as a backup for the commander, at least the card draw side of it. And then Skull Clamp, because we still do have a lot of little tokens, and you can even use this to pump up your big creatures that you're going to sacrifice anyways, just to draw a couple extra cards, because why not? And then one of the last things I have in here is a whole bunch of removal, things like Insidious Fungus. I have this one here. This is just another neat way to surprise people with a land when they least suspect it, because you can pay 1 for the fungus, but then 2 in sack to destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield tapped. So being able to do that instant speed can really surprise people. Get some landfall triggers off of that. And then Scavenging Ooze. You can put as many things into the graveyard. Other people may be putting things in their graveyard. You can make the ooze huge. Try to counter other people with graveyard strategies. Then you have things like Assassin's Trophy, another iconic removal spell. Infernal Grasp, great for getting rid of creatures. Beast Within. Culling Ritual. Now here's another fun one with Ashaya, because this one is specifically non-land permanents with mana value 2 or less. So all of your creatures are mana value 2 or less can be saved if Ashaya is in play. But also acts as a neat little ritual in that you get black or green mana for each permanent destroyed this way. And then a couple more board wipes with a Toxic Deluge and Blasphemous Edict. But that is the Gitrog Ravenous Ride deck, and I have about, including MDFCs, have about 40 lands in it, with things like Urbor, Cabal Coffers, Spymaster's Vault, Sorcerer Secundi, Void Altar, one of the new Edge of Eternity's cards, which is another great way to pay 2 life, sacrifice creature, draw cards equal to the sacked creature's power. Just another great way to just draw a ton of cards. But other than that, yeah, not too much to say. It's interesting. When I talked about my Norn deck before, that was a deck that I had known inside and out. It was time-tested, and I just knew every card so well. And there was only like a small, 5% of the deck was up for debate or wiggle room because I was so satisfied with everything. And this is sort of the opposite. This is one of my newer decks. And so this one, we'll probably be seeing things shape up over time as I get to playtest, see what things work, what things don't work. It's really sort of in a transitional phase between one deck that I've had for nearly a decade and this new deck that I'm still learning. I just know that in looking at the Gitrog Ravenous Ride, I was not too impressed by how most people were building their decks. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe the consensus is right, and playing these huge power, low mana value creatures with the big drawbacks is the best way to go to build the deck. I mean, that's what a lot of people seem to think. It's not what I want to play. It's not what I want to do. I don't want to play with cards that by themselves have a big drawback unless I'm playing like a Zedru deck and the whole goal is to get rid of them and hand them off to other people. That's different. But no, I would rather play something that's maybe not as explosive, not as optimal, but to me, these are cards that I can enjoy playing and I can get behind playing, and it may not be as quick as some of the other Gitrog decks, but I think it still has a lot to offer, and I'm happier to be a little slower out of the gate as long as I'm able to keep things protected. But I really do appreciate you stopping and listening to the video. I'll definitely do another deck overview in the future. Again, this is one of my newer decks. Most of my others are a lot more time-tested and have had hundreds of games, give or take, under their belts over the years, and I'm a lot more confident in the card choices. This one is definitely a lot more just going with my gut and saying, well, I'm not sure how this will pan out, how this will work. I've had a few games with this since making the change, but it still has a lot of the transitional pieces from when it was still a Meren deck, things like Elvish Reclaimer and stuff like that. But I do appreciate you listening, and I will be back later with another video. Take care. Bye. It's Elvish Reclaimer and Right of the Well. It's Elvish Reclaimer and Right of the... Can't say it. These cards are a holdover from my Meren deck, and maybe they'll be taken out at some point. I'm not sure. I have them in here as land tutors. It's Elvish Reclaimer and Right of the Reliquary.